Welcome to Elisha's Space, where faith and mental health converge. Today, we're joined by Dr. Janine Lowery, exploring self love and resilience. Deep dive with us into a journey of healing.
Thank you, audience, for joining Elisha Space. It is such a pleasure to have you join us for another episode. Today, I have with me Dr. Janine Lowery. She helps women create meaningful relationships with themselves and others so they can get their desired outcome in life. She is a therapist who is interested in assisting women in particular and creating a meaningful self love relationship with themselves. So, Dr. Lowery, I'd like to thank you for joining us today at Elisha Space. I really feel like this conversation is very needed, especially in these days and times where we're constantly giving towards other people, especially as women.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this.
Well, let me go ahead and get started with our first question. Could you describe what self love means to you and why it's crucial for women today?
So self-love is a individual definition for each and every one of us. So what I might consider to be self-love for me personally may look differently for you or someone in your audience. For instance, I would describe it as what brings you joy, what makes you feel the most confident, fulfilled. It also leads into what you're passionate about, what you can give to yourself to show yourself ways of how you can enjoy being a part of the land of the living, just to be able to have, gratitude, also being here amongst us all and just feeling at your best at all times.
I would also say that self love has to do with finding things that bring you joy and being intentional about bringing that joy into your life too. Wouldn't you say that that's also a form of self love?
Absolutely. Finding joy, knowing what you're passionate about, understanding, having more self awareness so you can understand your boundaries and what you will accept and what you won't accept. All of those things are important when we talk about self love.
So tell me, what was your journey like that brought you to a greater place of you loving yourself?
Well, for me personally, I went through some difficult times, especially when I went through a divorce. That's one of the reasons why, in my private practice, I focus on women who are going through a divorce or a breakup. So, because I have a lot of personal and professional experience in that area, I am happily married at the time, so I'm on the other side of that, and I can be able to reach back and explain to women who are experiencing the stress and anxiety and all the difficult things that comes along with going through that experience, how to find themselves again and be able to be at their best selves whether they're with someone or not. That I think is extremely important when we're talking about self-love, and that's how, for me personally, how I found my journey after going through my divorce.
Yes, I've gone through a divorce as well. And when you have that sort of a transition, it's almost like you're experiencing a type of death. What were some steps that you took that someone can take to start going on that journey for yourself of self love?
Hmm. Well, I would say just recognizing that sometimes things do unfortunately happen. I mean, you can be a really, really good person and find yourself in difficult situations and not be so hard on yourself. Learn to practice the art of forgiveness, because we have to admit that we actually chose these people that we wound up in a relationship. And now that things are over, being able to say to yourself, listen, I did not deserve that. And I'm going to do the best that I can to try to let go of the anger, the resentment, and the bitterness that is involved when you're going through that experience. But also forgiving yourself for not loving yourself to the point where you're like, you know what, I'm going to implement these boundaries and I don't want to be with that type of person. And going forward, learning from the experience so you can attract a different type of a relationship. That's why I think it's so important to go to therapy, not necessarily because you have an issue with someone else, or sometimes, right? I used to do couples therapy and they would come in and they want to, try to fix their relationship. But we all have our own self work that we need to work on. So, one of the steps that I would say for anyone who goes through a trauma, because that is a trauma, going through a serious breakup or divorce is a trauma, is to seek help and guidance. That would be my first suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I remember when I was going through it, it was piled on trauma for me. That's what it was like. It was it was piled on trauma. Plus I had children. I would even add to that and say give yourself permission to shed some of that stuff too, because my children were experiencing things too and I wanted to be a support to them. But it's really hard to be a support to them if you're going through something as well. Like if you're all going through something at the same time. And what I recall from it is the stress and anxiety that I experienced from it because it was almost overwhelming. I do like your idea of going to therapy and getting help, but what would you also say to someone who's maybe needing some strategies for managing the stress and anxiety if they're going through a transition of, what are some things they can do?
Yeah, you're right, because sometimes we all can't have access to a therapist for a variety of reasons. It could be that I hear a lot of people say that they're looking for a therapist that can relate to them, someone that looks like them. There's these cultural factors. So I would highly recommend, if you wanted to start somewhere, you couldn't go to therapy, to even go and possibly research a few good books would be great to start with. There are tons of, well, I want to say tons. There are some events on Eventbrite that could be helpful, and or different meetups to join other women who may be going through the same experience. If you're spiritual, you can join maybe a group at your church, or just going to church and and focusing on your spirituality, because it's extremely important to make sure you have a support system.
I completely agree with you. And I would also encourage you, audience, is just because I think a lot of times when you're experiencing a lot of stress and anxiety, and Dr. Lowery, I think you would agree with me, is just pay attention to what you have to deal with at that moment of what you have control over. Because there's so many other things you don't have control over. So just kind of pay attention to what you have control over and appreciate the moment that you're in, trusting that you won't always stay where you are. Someone I very, very greatly respect once told me, where you start is not where you stay. And so
Mm.
when you're going through a transition like a divorce, I would also make that statement to you all. Where you start is not where you stay. How can we recognize, because sometimes you can be dealing with so much stress and anxiety that you get caught in, I want to say almost like a tunnel vision type of situation. What are some ways someone can recognize the signs that their stress or anxiety is affecting their relationships with others, where they're just losing connections with others? Especially since when you talked about community and stating that community is so important.
So, some of the ways I would immediately think to go to would be sleeping, eating, sabotaging thoughts. So, if you notice that your sleeping is off, you're having difficulties getting to sleep, or you're getting too much sleep, there could be an issue there. Another red flag is, like I said, like eating, overeating, under eating. And with sabotaging thoughts, think about what you're thinking about. It is so important to recognize that, I am thinking these negative thoughts, because your thoughts and your behavior are connected. So if you're consistently thinking about, even if it's what if it would have worked out, wow, who is he with, and all the different, or she's with, all the different things that comes to mind that won't help you to move forward, is what we would call a sabotaging thought. and just recognize that, wait a minute, I'm not thinking straight because I'm constantly thinking about things that's not going to be helpful. And if you are doing any of those three, then those are clear signs that you are needing additional support, whether it's, like I said, get researching on Amazon and finding a book, go through the reviews and see if there's, I actually have a book. you know, my book is called Bold and Unbreakable Black Girl Soul Workbook. But there are tons of books on Amazon. It doesn't necessarily have to be my book. Or, again, I'm a firm believer in spirituality. I don't necessarily think it replaces therapy or a coach, because there are a lot of great life coaches out there as well. But I think it goes hand in hand. So that's what, if you notice you're having those three things: sleeping, eating, sabotaging thoughts, definitely it's time to do something different.
Right. And I do agree with you. What are some, you mentioned getting resources like reading a book or listening to a book on Audible or something like that, or even checking something out on YouTube or a podcast, that attending to some of these things. But I love to read. So I do get what you're saying when you talk about that. What would you say are some coping strategies a person can use to help them get through those difficult moments?
There is one coping strategy that I personally like, and the best way, I'm trying to think, how can I describe it? Because it's easier to see someone do it than to actually describe it via audio, but I'll try my best. Just imagine you are giving yourself a hug, but with that hug, you are actually like tapping yourself slightly as you're hugging yourself. Guess it's the best way to describe it. It's a grounding technique, and it feels so good because it's like you're giving yourself some love. You're giving yourself a literal hug, and I love doing that. And if you're out somewhere, you don't want to necessarily do it. Let's say if you're around a bunch of people and you don't want people to look at you like, what is she over there doing hugging herself? You can do something as simple as place your feet on the floor and tap your feet up and down, like slowly, to kind of soothe your body and to ground yourself. Those are some of the things that I try to do. Some of the coping strategies. I mean, there are tons of coping strategies. I was just trying to think of something that you can do in the moment when you're feeling like really, really anxious and you want to try to calm yourself. But the thing about coping strategies, it's really not one of those things where what works for me might work for you. You have to test them out. You have to test them out. And you mentioned YouTube, which is great. So I would highly recommend going YouTube, type in coping strategies and see what pops up. Because I just listed a few that works for me, but that doesn't necessarily work for someone else.
Right. I also agreement with you as far as like doing some grounding exercises, deep breathing. I'm big, especially if you feel yourself, because a lot of times when you're experiencing stress, you kind of feel it in your neck, your shoulders, your back, and your chest. So I usually also suggest to people to do some deep breathing exercises. I was at the doctor the other day, and that's exactly what I was doing. Sis was doing some deep breathing because I wasn't feeling what they was trying to do. So, yeah, so the deep breathing exercises help. And also, too, there's all kinds of different things that you can do, really. There are all kinds of things that you can do. There's also progressive muscle relaxation, where you can tighten certain parts of your body and then release it as well. There's all kinds of things, audience, that you can do as a coping strategy when you're experiencing heightened anxiety and stress. I have often told my clients, Dr. Lowery, that the most important relationship you have is the relationship you have with yourself. Because if you have a good relationship with yourself, it helps in having good relationships with others because you have a good relationship with yourself. Can you talk a little bit more about how having a relationship with yourself can affect your relationships with others?
That's a really good question. So, one of the things you'll realize when you have a good relationship with yourself is you'll understand what you are willing to accept and what you won't accept, which will help you define your boundaries. And when you define your boundaries, it helps to build a better relationship with individuals because they'll know what you will accept and what you won't accept, which in turn will help you to be a happier person. So that is one of the best ways I can describe it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not like talking about arrogance, but I am talking about you knowing yourself, getting to know yourself. We were talking about self love earlier. That's what I take it into be of self love, of you getting to know yourself, you learning what you like and what you don't like. And what I've discovered is the more you know about yourself, the more you accept who you are as an individual, the less you're willing to put up with other people's crap. I don't know how else
Mm,
to say it. Because you know who you are. It doesn't make you as susceptible to being taken advantage of. It doesn't mean you won't be taken advantage of, but you know yourself well enough to know. So if someone comes up to me and they say, everybody can see in my pictures and everything. If you go into Elisha Space podcast, you can see I'm a Black woman. So you can't come up to me and tell me I'm an Asian woman. Now, I might have Asian in my bloodline that I don't know about. That's very possible. But I identify as a Black woman. So telling me I'm something else doesn't fit for me. Or telling me I'm a tree when I know I'm a human being, that doesn't fit for me. And so I agree with you completely that the more you know who you are, the more defined your boundaries can be, and the less people can have influence over how they feel you should be, which I think also helps you with your relationships. Would you agree?
absolutely. 100% agree.
Mm-hmm.
And when I work with clients, sometimes I take it even a step further. We talk about the emotional stages of development and we go over the definitions of what it means to be an infantile adult, a childish adult, an adolescent adult, and a mature adult. And
Mm-hmm.
what I love when we do that exercise, it helps clients understand, okay, after they read the definition, okay, I can see where I might be a childish adult, so I want to work on that. And that way, it empowers them to attract someone who is a mature adult. They're working on their maturity level, and then they attract other individuals because they know what it really means to be a mature adult. Because the thing about the emotional stages of development is that you can change your emotional state. Like I gave you an example of a person who identified as a childish adult, but you can't change, your chronological ages. A lot of times you ever hear people say, "Oh, I'm 32. I'm an adult. I know what I'm doing. But are you really? Are you a mature adult? You can't, you know what I mean? You're going to be 32, 42. You're going to grow older, but what a lot of us need to work on are those emotional stages of development. It is so important when we talk about self-awareness and self-love because you invite all these people into your life, then you don't realize that, wait a minute, I shouldn't have been with that person in the first place. They were an infantile adult. And a lot of infantile adults have narcissistic tendencies. That's like the buzzword now. Oh, he or she was a narcissist. But if you understand the emotional stages of development, you will stay away from individuals like that. So yeah, it's all important, good work that we all have to do.
Yeah, those are excellent points you're bringing because I get asked the question quite often, why do I keep attracting, or why do these people feel like, they can approach me or they can continue to be in these spaces? And knowing who you are and within your emotional maturity, I think
Mhm.
that is extremely important because that, with what you do with your clients, you're helping them to recognize, okay, this is where I am and this is where I'm going. This is the direction I'm going. And it can particularly help with setting boundaries. What I found, because you talked about relationships and how sometimes people feel like, what I found is that those who are emotionally immature, let's say they come across someone who is more emotionally mature. And when that person realizes that they can't get what they want from the person that's more emotionally mature, what I found is that you almost get a response like you would from someone who is younger, like a temper tantrum, or
Mhm.
they do they're, and I want to be they're ranting, they're venting and all those other things. And I think it's really good that you bring that up within your sessions when you're working either one on one or in groups with people, to help them to recognize, okay, this is where you are, but this is where you're going. And these are the things you can do in order to start going in that direction. How would you say, because you talked about your faith, how would you say that your faith has affected relationships in general and how that has helped as well?
Well, for me, like I mentioned earlier, I'm very spiritual. I pray every day, and I have a tendency to consult with God right before I make decisions. Well, in my relationships, now I wasn't always like this. This is part of the reason I believe I wasn't in a successful relationship many years ago. But and not to say that all the decisions that I've made recently have been the greatest, but I can say I feel at peace within my spirit and my heart that I'm doing what I believe God would want me to do, because there's not, like, I don't make random decisions. Oh, okay, you know what? I'm going to be with in the and now that I'm married, I'm talking about like friendships and business relationships, and because there's always going to be relationships. I take some time and consult with God to see if this is a good fit for me. That might not be what everyone should do or does, but that's you ask me what do I do, and I find that it works really well for me. Goes along with that with one of my favorite Bible quotes, and trusting in the Lord with all my heart and lean not into my own understanding, in all his ways I acknowledge him and he'll direct my path, and that's what I live by. It's extremely helpful for me.
I'm in agreement with you. And I will even add to that with saying that for me, if I don't have peace about it, because peace has been a very strong guide or barometer for me. If I don't have peace about it, I won't touch it with a 10-foot pole. And that's people, businesses, institutions, whatever. Whatever the situation might be, if I don't have a peace about it, I'm going to leave you be. And that has been a great guide for me when it comes to making decisions. And also, I would add, I'm similar to you in that I don't rush to make decisions. I'm going to pause. There's something powerful about the pause and pray about it first. Because I have found that if I rush into something or if I feel like I have to do it right then and there, I have found that's not a good fit for me. But if I push the pause button and if I kind of like meditate on it a little bit, or if I just kind of sit back and think, how does this fit? It helps me to make a better decision overall. So I do agree with you in regards to that. And it's helped with the challenges as well that you faced. It sounds like you've come on the other side of not necessarily the self love piece, but it sounds like you're still evolving in that area, which we all are. But when it comes to managing things from your divorce and things, it sounds like you've come from the other side of that. What would you say are some of the most significant things you learned as a result of coming on the other side of that?
Well, the way I got on the other side is radical forgiveness.
Mm,
Ooh,
I
and
like
that was
that.
hard, hard, hard. Ooh, is that hard? It was just difficult because, you in these situations and someone has done you wrong, there's infidelity involved and all kinds of things going on. But I had to just say to myself, I don't want this to have so much power over me. I don't think people do a good job. I don't want to say everyone, but a lot of individuals out here when they talk about forgiveness, I don't think they do a good job. I guess I can stick to that on explaining why forgiveness is for you and not the other person. I don't know. I haven't heard a lot. Like, I did a lot of research on it because I didn't understand. Like, what you mean is for me and not the other person? What does that mean? When I'm over here hurting, some of it is rooted in the fact that it messes with all of the systems, like your muscular system and your nervous system, and If you always angry and upset and bitter and full of rage because this person did something to you, it is going to affect your body, which can in turn cause all kinds of illnesses and disease. So that's why they tell you to let it go. But like I said, I had to do a little research because I didn't hear anybody explain it like that. Because I kept wondering, what are they saying? And then I feel like it's not explained enough of what forgiveness is and what forgiveness is not. It doesn't necessarily mean that I have to reconcile with this person. I don't ever have to speak to you again and still forgive you. I don't Forgiveness doesn't mean that you condone their action. Sometimes people think that's the truth. Oh, if I forgive them, that means I'm letting them off the hook. I mean, no, you're letting yourself off the hook because you don't have to walk around angry anymore. So, and what it looks like is that it doesn't mean that you won't think about it sometimes, and it doesn't mean that you won't get slightly angry. It just means that when you do think about it, you won't feel that anger inside. I mean, it'll make you maybe naturally angry. I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly. Like, I mean, because it's like how you see something on TV and maybe anger isn't the word. It'll be like a little annoying because that happened, but that hurt feeling, that's what it means. It's kind of like you let go of that part and you recognize, yes, this person did this to me. I don't want. I may or may not want to be in a relationship with them ever again, but I'm going to let that go. And I also learned to pray for the person because you know what? People don't realize where they don't connect with. Hurt people hurt people. Even that person that did something horrible to you, they've been hurt. Somebody hurt them, something that happened to them. Even if we want to talk about narcissism, because like I said, a lot of my clients, they love to come and they say, oh, my ex was a narcissist. But guess what? That's a full-blown diagnosis. It's in the DSM. So guess what? In order to be a narcissist, something horrible happened to that person. People don't just wake up and decide to be a narcissist. So I had to connect with that part. I'm like, wow, you know what? That's deep. Something or some. And then too, if you think about it like that, you also don't want to turn into that person that hurts someone else. Because again, what do we say? Hurt people. And a lot of times we don't realize that we are hurting someone else. Just the mere fact that you are so hurt that you decided to be the type of person that's like real closed off, shut down, emotionally unavailable, all those things. And you thinking it's because you're protecting yourself. And it is a protection, but you might be hurting somebody in the long run. So clean all that up. That's why everybody need to go to therapy.
Very, very true. Very, very true. In a study I was looking at, I saw how bitterness can affect your bones. It can go into your bones. Isn't that wild? It can
Mm, mm,
affect your arthritis and things like that. So, yes, yes, unforgiveness, bitterness, anger, all those things, that mind body connection audience that I talk about a lot. This stuff, real health is wealth. And
mhm,
letting go. See, I see forgiveness as it being for you, where you're choosing to release all that crap. And I'm going to call it crap, all that ickiness you're choosing to release. And you're not allowing it to shift or move you anymore. Because whatever happened. And what that person is dealing with, they got to deal with. But it's not your issue. That's a them problem. That's not a you problem. And getting to that place, sometimes it takes a while to get there. Sometimes it takes a while to get there. I want to thank you for coming onto the show. I really appreciate you taking out the time because I think this is such an important topic. What is an affirmation, a final mantra? Like, what do you really want the audience to get from this podcast episode today?
mm. Well, because we've talked so much about forgiveness, I would love for everyone to walk away with that key point. Forgiveness is definitely for you and it's not for the other person.
Very, very true. Very, very true. I want to thank you for being on the show. Would you like to share if someone wants to get in contact with you, your information so that they can reach out to you? And of course, audience, I will have this in the show notes as well so that you can have the resource there as well.
So the best way to get in contact with me is to go to blackfemaletherapist.org, and that's therapist without an S. It's just one therapist. So blackfemaletherapist.org. And I'm licensed in Pennsylvania and in Florida.
Okay. And are you doing any classes or anything of that nature?
I'm not doing any classes right now, but
Okay.
what I do is that I am also a mental health filmmaker. So I'm spending some time just going out into the public. I travel around and show my film. The film is on Black female therapists and their personal journeys with their own mental health. And a lot of times we'll go out, myself and a few other therapists, and we'll show the film, and then we'll do like therapy speed dating where individuals are allowed to spend 5 or 6 minutes with us. And then, it's just like regular speed dating. It's kind of cool. It's kind of fun. And you get to ask us different questions. So if you have anyone out in your audience that is interested, and we do that all across the country. We love to come out and show the film and do the speed dating. And we have a few other activities that we also do as well. Do like panel discussions about Black mental health. So yeah, it's fun.
It sounds like fun. So I'll make sure to have all that information in the show notes as well. So, audience, if you've been listening to Elisha Space Podcast for a while, the topic of forgiveness keeps coming up. So let's move in that healing space. Let's start putting our focus into choosing to forgive so that we can walk into becoming better versions of ourselves, so that we're letting go of our own anger, resentment, and just moving into a space of self-love for yourself as you move into forgiveness. Thank you for joining Elisha Space, and be well.
Thanks for listening, and we hope you'll subscribe so we can keep the conversation going. Now go move forward in your healing journey.